Live. Whoops. Starting soon. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Meryl Moss, publisher of booktrib.com and president of Meryl Moss Media Relations, a media group as we go. Today, I'm so excited about the guest we have today. This is an incredible woman who's been through everything when it comes to producing film. She has a new book called Creative Producing. We're going to go behind the scenes with her. She's a producer of one of them that everybody may know because it's a feel-good, wonderful family movie called Father of the Bride. And we're going to learn what skills are necessary for a top Hollywood producer. She was formerly with Dolly Parton's production company, Sandollar, and she'll talk about that as a successful independent producer. She's an expert in the art of film production, and creative producing provides a crash course in frequently misunderstood producer's role and the many skills needed to survive and thrive in Hollywood. Carol she's produced 34 movies, 17 of them independently, and co-president of Sandollar Productions. She worked with Sandy Gallin's production company and produced hits like I said, Father of the Bride, and the award-winning documentary Common Threads, Stories from the Quilt, Jackknife, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Kicking and Screaming, and many more. One of which is Dead Ringers, which is one of her favorites and mine, David Cronenberg. We can talk a little bit about that and the dark side. Baum currently teaches producing in film and television production division at USC School of Cinematic Arts. She is also a member of the Peter Stark producing program at USC. We are thrilled to have her here. We know a lot of authors are here wondering, how do I get my book into the movies? We're going to talk all about that. Let's get Carol right on.
Hello, hi, everybody. Carol. Nice to be here. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. We're so excited. This is such a perfect match with the audience that we have at booktrib.com. Let's start at the beginning, right? Tell us a little bit about you, where you started, and then how you got the idea for the book, and we'll go from there.
Well, the book comes much later, but I grew up in a suburb of New Jersey called South Orange, and South Orange was filled with kids, daughters, and sons of doctors and lawyers. Movies were not part of our upbringing at all. But I used to babysit every Saturday night when I was 11. And when I was babysitting, after I put Marcia Manowitz to bed, I watched movies and I got spellbound by them. Nobody was with me. It was like a magical experience. It's like what people feel when they go to church, I guess. It was like, and the first movie that turned me on, and I remember it, is a movie called The Fountainhead. It's not one of the classics, and a lot of people don't like it because it's Ayn Rand and people have problems with her. However, this movie was with Gary Cooper and Patricia O'Neill, who have this star-crossed love relationship, and it hypnotized me. And I still watch it at least once every couple of years to bring me back to that moment of love, because it was love.
And can we just say for one moment that The Fountainhead came from a book, right?
Absolutely. Ayn Rand was a big author. But the reason people, when I mention it to people, they don't like it because she had a philosophy that was very dominated over the storytelling of that piece. But it's all in her book. And I read that 500-page book because when you fall in love with a movie, you want to know the source. And even then, I understood that things started somewhere. And my best friend, Wendy, and I read the book and recited lines from the book to each other. That was the beginning. I didn't know it. I was just a kid, but it was love. It really was. It was a surrendering to material, to actors, to the directing of it, to the black and whiteness of it, which is something that people today, my students, don't want to watch. They do not want to watch black and white movies. And this is a pity because you learn everything from watching these movies. And I mean everything. These are the movies, not only the classics with gigantic stars like Cary Grant and Joan Crawford and Bette Davis and all the people we
Barbara Stanwyck. Oh.
Barbara Stanwyck,
Loved her.
who can beat it really? And those movies bear watching again and again and again because they're the template for what goes on today. Many people don't realize that they're doing a story like Double Indemnity or like All About Eve or like, but everything started then. And those stories are magnificent stories by real writers, whether it's Bud Schulberg or Faulkner or Truman Capote or whomever it is. Their names, one name, not 1,000 names, one producer, one writer, one director. And I look at those credits and I think, wow, that must have been really satisfying.
So what is it about the black and white and the classics that your students today, what is it that doesn't, appeal?
I've asked them because I want to know, because it frustrates me. They think they're slow. They're waiting for the bombs to go off. They're waiting for the action. I think pacing has something to do with it. I don't find those movies slow because they're so tense and dramatic and you're so sucked into the drama of it. That's not slow. But they think it is. Also, I think they like the color, whatever that means to them. They grew up on color.
Well, I wonder if it has something to do with our frenetic lives where we're fed so much continuously. You look at TikTok, you look at social, you can switch, constantly and swipe and switch. And so it's like we've gotten used to this short bits and short attention span. But then there's a film like the one that just came out with oh, what I can't, it's not coming to me. About the atomic bomb. What am I talking about?
Oh, Oppenheimer. Yeah.
Oppenheimer, which is a riveting, a lot of drama, riveting. Did you see it? I'm sure you saw it.
I did see it, but if that film hadn't gotten the publicity because of Barbie and the whole thing, that
Right.
was such a marketing miracle.
A
I'm
marketing
not sure
miracle.
that people would have been flying to that theater. I don't know, because that's a difficult movie. That is not your commercial movie by today's standards. But I have a grandson who's 11, and this is what he's watching: The Shining, The Exorcist, scary stuff. He watched The Fly, Cronenberg's The Fly, and I said to my son, how could you let him watch The Fly? It's horrifying. It's so grotesque when Jeff Goldblum turns into the fly. And he said, well, it doesn't penetrate, it doesn't bother him. And this is an 11, I'm going to learn from my 11-year-old grandson why it doesn't bother him. Bothers me. Grotesque images are bothersome. Violence is bothersome to me. I'm a softie. But, I love those. I mean, The Shining is a character piece. It has the violence. It's genius because it's Kubrick. But it started, going back to the book, it started with Stephen King. Stephen King, we know now, is a master writer. He wasn't when I found that book. He was just beginning his career.
Walk us through this for a moment. How did you find the book? Was it?
Well, I was in New York, and part of my job profile was to find manuscripts before they were published. And I mean a year before they were published. If a book was out on the stands, it was too late already. We were chasing books at the early stages. And that could be from an outline, from an idea, from a finished manuscript. And I was friendly with an editor at New American Library. And she wanted to hire me, actually. That's how I got to know her. And I was a reader. I was just, in New York reading
Flush
books.
pile reader?
Kind of. And I had a couple of jobs, and I can talk about them. But anyway, this nice editor said, I have a present for you. There's a book that we're going to publish. It's called The Shine. It's by a new writer, Stephen King. Nobody knows who he is. And I'm going to give it to you. So there was no agent, there was no nothing. And I read this book. Can you imagine? I was so excited. And at the time, I had a job. I was working for, and this I tell everybody, get a job, but we'll get into that. You can't do this by yourself in a vacuum. You just can't. I worked for a company called the Producers Circle. They were a very tiny company run by theater people who decided they wanted to go into the movie business. And they had a lot of money. So I said, that's why they hired me, find us material. And I said, okay, this is it, guys. I am going to give you this present of this fantastic book. And they put down $350,000. At that time, that would be, I don't know, over $1 million. It was a big number. And they had the book, the producer circle. Their name is on the poster, mine is not, because when you have those jobs at the beginning, if you don't have a good contract, you don't get your name on the movie. But that poster hangs in my office, and I'm very proud of it. And
Absolutely.
every job I got afterwards was because of The Shining. I was, oh, the girl who got The Shining.
Didn't you also pick up a book from the bottom of the slush pile when you were in publishing?
No, we didn't really read The Slush Pile. What I read was, when I was at Random House, that was my second publishing job. I worked for a man whose job it was to find new writers. Well, that's how I learned that that was a good thing to do. And every day he went and played pool. And pool was very popular at that time. That was when The Hustler came out with Paul Newman. It was a very popular sport. And he was gone. So when his authors called, they talked to me. And they would say, where is he? And I'd say, oh, he had a family emergency, or I make some excuse. And I made friends with the writers. And I became the person they called, not him. And that was the beginning of my career, because I realized that I knew how to talk to writers. I knew how to calm them down, because everybody's upset all the time.
All the time.
Writers are often ignored, or even if they're not ignored, they're not given the respect and the attention that they crave. And there I am, this kid who thinks they're wonderful. So why not?
And they are. We love
And they
authors.
are the wonderful. They're the best. And these were novelists. These were not screenwriters. But I realized, and also I was married to one, and I think that kind of gave me a sensitivity to what they were going through. Because when you're married to somebody who, he's sitting by the phone waiting for somebody to read the latest submission, and they don't call, and they don't write, and you say, what's going on? I learned that you don't do that. So that's one of my first rules. Return every phone call. Don't stand on ceremony. People are sitting by the phone waiting, or the email or the text or whatever it is. If you can't get to it, just write to whomever and say, I'm 3 weeks away from reading it, or 2 weeks, or whatever. Please be patient. That's all you need to do. And nobody does it. I mean, nobody. So I don't know.
Very important today. Today more than ever, I think. It's always been busy, but it's so busy because of technology and many things that just the courtesy of saying, I'm on it, I have it, because people are waiting. They're really waiting, at the edge of their seat. I can just imagine. So today,
And, people then have a high regard for you for paying attention. It's that simple to me. And I just did that from the beginning because I had that boss who played pool every day. I have him to thank for it, I guess. And so I had 2 publishing jobs. The first one was at Bantam, which was softcover reprint house, and Random House was hardcover. And I was the reader. That was my job title. It was not slush pile. Maybe once in a while it was, but mostly it was agent submitted manuscripts. And they sat around. Sometimes people paid attention to them. Sometimes people didn't. And I just took them home. Nobody asked me. That's the other thing. If you get in one of these entry-level jobs, don't wait to be asked. Don't wait for the mentor. Don't wait to be taught. Just do it. And the second rule is be an advocate. If you like something, and this is across the board, if you like something, make your enthusiasm be known, and people will pay attention. When you get excited, they get excited. These rules are my rules. They're very simple.
That's great advice for working in any industry, really.
Yeah.
I mean, really participate and get into it. Why don't you take us through? I want to ask a question. You said that back when you first started, it was early stages where producers were looking to books. They had to be, if they were out already, it was too late. Do you think that's still the case today?
Yeah, I think people are buying books in the early stages. Maybe maybe not as much as it was then. Then it really was very competitive. I had to get the book before Warner's, before Paramount, before They all had New York offices who were all scrambling for the same material. Now, the studios have scouts, which is what I was really, but they call them scouts now. And those are the people who comb the publishing houses to see what's coming up. And they write little pieces of coverage about what's coming. And then the people in California say, go get that one. I want that one. So I don't think it's changed that much. I think the bidding war is not what it used to be. It may come back now post-strike because we're going to be flooded with spec material and all kinds of material. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
I've
Because
had a client of mine has, with all the streaming and the content that, this voracious appetite for content, her books are being picked up way after publication date and way later because of streaming, I think. So it's there may be a shift. I mean, you're in the world, so I mean, it's always great to get something early, but if something is great and it hasn't been picked up and it hasn't been, produced, is content, good
well,
content is
that's interesting. I guess I'm not aware of the waiting. I think still the hot books are the hot books. Scorsese became attached to David Grann's book, which was a bestseller. I don't know at what point he became attached to it, but that was a pursued property. Everybody knew about it. The David Grann book, and it may not have gotten bought until later, but the buzz was there from
the
early,
Hollywood
early,
buzz.
early stages. So I don't think that's changed that much, but I'm, not 100% because I'm not doing the books the way I used to.
No, you're not. Is there a reason why, or just
Well, I'm not in New York and my access isn't there. I have to wait for somebody to give me a book and I'm not on that list. I don't have a studio deal. So
but
I have to, and my interest shifted to screenwriters. I went to Hollywood. In Hollywood, it's screenwriters and not manuscripts. So I saw what I had to do. And what I
would it
had to
be
do is get to know.
advantageous
I'm
for an
sorry.
author to write, a script if they have a book that, there's so many books, so many authors. Is it advantageous to write a script, have the book, and then also write a script?
Well, it used to be that people didn't want the author of the book to write the script because they were too faithful to the book.
Too close to it?
And that in fact happened with Stephen King. He was so faithful to his book, The Shining, that he wrote a very, very, very long script and it was unmakeable. So there is a prejudice about that. But now a lot of authors have become screenwriters because that's where the money is. Novelists don't make the kind of money that screenwriters make. And Dennis Lehane, for example, I share offices with the agent of Dennis Lehane. He's a prolific writer of crime novels, but also writes screenplays, also is now a producer. He understands, because he's represented very well, that he has to do it all in order to make a living. Books, except for the occasional big one, don't make the writer that much money.
No,
So,
the writers write because they have to, right? I mean, it's in their head. They have to. They work on it. We help them promote them. We get them in front of eyes, as many, readers as we can. But it's definitely it's a lonely life sometimes. It can be a lonely life.
well, going back to, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Nathaniel West and all those guys, it was the same thing. Their books, they weren't making a living from those books, which are now classics, and we love them, but they came to Hollywood. They didn't like Hollywood so much. I don't think Hollywood was that great to them. I mean, Fitzgerald has written about it widely, and he's Fitzgerald, everybody knows The Great Gatsby, but he had the same complaints that writers do today. Nobody's paying attention. They're making me change it, the usual
Well, this
complaints.
is the thing. Classics don't happen overnight, right? I mean, when you think back, okay, you mentioned in your book about The Godfather, right? It became a classic, but in the beginning, when it was written, it wasn't seen that way. it became a
No,
classic.
The Godfather is a good example of a book that's, mainstream, not a literary masterpiece, a great yarn, great characters, a brilliant book. But sure, for it to become, Coppola made it be a masterpiece. I mean, I guess you could talk to any number of people on that movie and they would be saying, I'm the one who made it a masterpiece. But we all know what Coppola did. And the casting of that movie is magnificent. And the stories, you can watch it again. And that's a movie that my students do watch. And that's, by today's standards, old. Not that
Yeah,
old, older.
definitely watch it over and over. And then there was The Offer, which was the streaming show about the making of The Godfather, right?
Well, that was a controversial piece because people thought that he made it up, that it wasn't really what happened. So that created some problems. I thought it was very entertaining, but I wasn't there. But if somebody did that on one of my movies and did a documentary and got the facts wrong, I would be concerned. But he took credit. People said he wasn't even on set. Some people say that, and other people say, yeah, he's the guy. Very different points of view about that one, but that
Mhm.
was entertaining.
Tell us about one of the movies that you're known for is Father of the Bride, and dealing with these comedians, hysterical Diane Keaton, Steve Martin. Tell us about how that was.
Well, that's a remake, and remakes at that time were not being done. So I had to fight to get Sandollar. I was at Sandollar at the time, Dolly Parton and Sandy Gallin's company, and I had to get a company behind the purchase, the option of that original material. And the original movie, which was made in, I forget, in the 50s, starred Spencer Tracy, who was a big star at the time. Elizabeth Taylor is the daughter. And it was a black and white movie. It's a perfect example of what the kids won't watch. It's a nice story about this father giving away his daughter and the relationship between them. And it's beautiful. And I loved it. And I thought, why not? Maybe the time has come to do a retelling of this very simple story. It really is a very simple story, and do it with a comedic overlay. And that's what happened. By casting Steve Martin in the Spencer Tracy role, it's, well, Steve could have done it dramatically, but Steve's a funny guy and we want him to be funny. But the basic emotion is the same. His daughter is getting married. He can't stand it. Nobody's good enough for her. He's losing his little girl. And the brilliant scene that Sharon Myers came up with is the daughter is at the dining table and suddenly she's a little girl. And she says to Steve Martin, Daddy, I'm getting married. And that's still how he sees her, his precious daughter. It's very clever. It's just a moment, but it makes you laugh and it makes you understand the father's dilemma. And he's sad. He's going to lose her.
He said
And
he who's going to play
it takes
basketball
him
with.
the whole movie to accept the boyfriend who's going to be the husband. But the other part of that movie, which is why people who are getting married watch it, is the wedding. The wedding itself, because your life is taken over by a wedding. Now we have destination weddings and weddings, and it's become such an elaborate thing. Um, my kids at a certain age were going to a wedding every weekend, and they would come. These same kids would come into my office and say, "Oh, I studied that movie. We didn't have Marty Short as the wedding planner, but we had our own wedding planner, and he told us what to do." And it wasn't that funny because everybody gets uptight about spending money and who's going to be invited and who's going to be crossed off the list. All of those details are there. Sometimes they're hidden and sometimes they're out
Yeah,
front.
that's one you could watch over and over again. Also, it has that quality.
Well, thank you. I mean, I can watch the Spencer Tracy over and over and the Steve Martin over and over. And sort of, I'm going to teach it this week in my class because our subject is remakes.
Uh-huh.
And, it's a perfect example of what to take and what to lose. Some of the scenes are identical. Steve Martin trying to use his old tuxedo because he's too cheap to buy a new one. It's exactly the same scene in the Spencer Tracy, and where it rips in the back because he thinks he can squeeze into it. It's turned into a comic set piece. It was always a little bit funny, but not like, Steve, his instinct, and the director and writer's instinct was to just blow that up.
Mhm.
And that's the fun of movie making.
Light and fun. And then the other favorite is Dead Ringers, which is the opposite of light and fun, right? That's Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because that has a very interesting premise.
Well, people may not remember it because it's not one of those wildly seen movies, but it is a classic, I think. In some circles, it's considered a classic. And I found this newspaper article. I didn't find it. It was on the front page of the New York Times. Everybody read it. These twin gynecologists who worked on Upper Park Avenue in a fancy office, very handsome, successful guys, considered fertility gods because they got women pregnant who couldn't conceive. And they were found dead together, mysteriously. And front page in the New York Times. And I read that article and I thought, oh my God, what a story. This has got to be a movie, because the mystery of the Marcus twins and the tension and the brother relationship, I just had to do it. And then it turned out, and this was lucky for me, that the a person in my poker group, I played poker in those days, her name was Barry Wood, was writing a novel based on this article.
Oh,
And and it was called Twins, and I optioned the article. And I was able to pay my own money because she was a new writer and she didn't have an agent, or maybe she did have an agent, but nobody was paying attention to this story. They thought it was too dark. And I put down my money. I've never done it again because you're not supposed to put down your own money as a producer. And I had that option, and it took 10 years for that movie to get made, because that's the kind of story that it is. I remember making the rounds with David Cronenberg, who was still new in his career. And making the rounds means you have meetings at every place that can finance a project. And everybody passed. Like, they just didn't like the story. And David said, I'm going to write this myself. I believe in this. And he hired a friend of his to write it with him, Norman Snyder. And it became his, mission, his
right.
labor of love. And sometimes you get lucky and that happens. And then David's career started to grow. He did this one and this one and this one. And then he
When you
made
do
The Fly.
traffic.
No, no, he did. He was at the beginning, he made small horror films that you
Soderbergh.
probably don't know.
Mm.
And they were all expertly made, creepy films. And then one day he made a remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, and it was gigantic success. And then after that happens with anybody, what do you want to do, David? What's your
Right,
favorite project? And he
right.
said, well, as a matter of fact, and that's how it got made. But he had to make The Fly first. He may
Wow.
tell a different version of this story. That's my version. It took that long.
Well, in the same thing in the book world, you might get rejected by publisher after publisher after publisher. And in today's world, the barrier to entry to produce your own book and publish your own book is very low. You can do it, right? You can do it. And sometimes, there have been incredible stories about authors who have independently published and gone on to be, very big successes. So, it's an interesting world we live in. The gatekeepers are changing, right? I mean, I guess there still are, those that, can really produce and finance, but people can do a lot of things themselves that they couldn't do some number of years ago. To help our audience, would you talk a little bit about what a shopping agreement is and how they can understand that? Because that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I'd love to help people
Well,
watching.
I put an example of one in the book, so you can read it and see it. What it is just a lawyer can draft it, or you can draft it and get a legal person to sign off on it, because I think it's tricky if you don't have somebody with authority signing off on it. What it is a page agreement with the writer of the book saying, I have the ability, you have, are giving me the ability to try to get this made, to shop it. That means to take it around to directors and writers and financiers. That means shopping it. And for 6 months or a year, 2 years or whatever it is, and they sign it and you sign it, and that's it. It's
And
very
no money is
simple.
exchanged.
No money is exchanged. There's no money mentioned in the shopping agreement. That's the point.
Right.
Some writers will say, well, I want to know what you're going to pay me when you get the movie made. And we say, we can't tell you, because that could change a million times. It could be a $1 million movie. It could be a $150 million movie. We're not going to put a number on it because it will backfire. And some authors don't like that, and then they won't do it. But most will be so happy that you're going to put your time and enthusiasm in their work. They're happy to do it. I do it all the time. So,
What
agents don't like it, but I like it.
right. And how long do you suggest is a good amount of time?
Well, I think you ask for 15 months. That's sort of a common number, and they'll give you a year.
Mhm.
They'll usually give you a year because it takes that long to get somebody to pay attention. You're
It
not
does.
going to get somebody to pay attention in the first month. That is unlikely to happen. Every project, everybody should know this, it's years. You have to have a long attention span because nothing happens overnight, nothing. So your shopping agreement is for a year and then you renew it. Let's say nothing happens in the year, but you've earned the respect of the author. The
Right.
author, you have kept, this is important too, you keep the author apprised of what you're doing. You show the author, oh, I submitted it here, there, I make lists on everything. And you show the author what you have been up to. It shouldn't be a blank page, you won't get a renewal. But if you can prove that you're sincere and you're really making efforts, and it's not the book's fault, it's the buyer's fault for not recognizing the brilliance of the material, and they'll renew it for another 6 months, another year, forever. That's what happens.
So the difference between a shopping agreement and an option. Can you
An
talk a little bit?
option is money. An option is where what I did with Dead Ringers. I guess I had a lawyer at the time, I don't even remember, and I paid whatever money I paid, and it had to be in writing, and it had to be legal, and it had a dollar number on it. That's what an option is. I paid $1 to option your book for a year, and that's that's a legal binding agreement and very different from a shopping agreement, which requires no money at all.
Mhm.
So but most producers do not option stuff in my world, because they don't have the money. We'd be broke if we did that all the time.
Right. So you're basically, so shopping agreements are more popular these days. That's what,
Well, popular within the independent people. Studios don't have shopping agreements. I don't think an agent would honor a shopping agreement from a studio. Studio's the money. Where's the money?
right.
So the big guys can pay for something, and the little guys, the independents, don't. It's that simple. It's really, you try to get a big company to buy it for you, but here's the downside of that. Say you go to Warner Brothers and they option it for you, and then they lose interest in it. They own it for the amount of time that the option goes, but they don't care. So you're stuck with a dead project. So in a way, you're better off doing it yourself if you can and keeping it alive with your own energy. I know many writers who will not sell their scripts, their precious scripts, because they don't want them to die at a studio. That happens. Studios here's what studios pass on. Head of a studio passed on E.T. Harry Potter was not bought. The sexy book, whose name I forget, was a
50 Shades?
50 Shades was not recognized until it got recognized. There are a million stories like that.
Yeah.
So what's the answer? Just, if you believe in it, just don't listen to anybody.
Right. Don't listen to anybody and try to get help from different people. Now, when you take a shopping agreement, is that an exclusive, or can you have shopping agreements with more than one person? Pretty much an exclusive.
No, the shopping agreement is for the one piece of material. And
But you can only work with one producer.
well, no, I mean, that's up to you. It's up to the person, up to me. If I want to take on a partner, uh, that's my department. I don't have to
No,
ask
I mean,
permission
as
of the
let's say,
author.
as the author, if an author meets somebody and there's a producer that wants to have a shopping agreement, you can only be working with one
Oh, yeah,
producer.
yeah, yeah. You've made a
That's the
deal
right way
with,
to handle
yeah, you've made a deal with me. You can't bring on another producer unless you say to me, there's somebody who really loves my book. Would you consider sitting down with them and maybe partnering with them because they have access to X, Y, and Z and you don't? And then it's your decision. So you can partner up with somebody. That could be a good thing or not a good thing, depending on who the person is.
Well, I think a lot of newbies might not understand that they could talk to their producer that way, their agent that way, have these kind of open conversations, that there are kind of options, so to speak, a bit.
Well, the agents know it for sure. And it's a lot of paperwork for them when it's so iffy. So they don't really like to do it. It's really up to me to do it privately with the author. And I do it all the time because the book, I'm not going to do it with a best-selling book. Nobody will honor that. That has to be represented by a legitimate person. But a book that's 5 years old or then sitting there and nobody cares, why wouldn't the author give it to me or somebody like me?
Right,
You know,
exactly.
you're
So there
showing
is
the
a way.
love that nobody is showing. I mean, I
Ex
took around, if I told you all the projects that I took around that people didn't recognize, Back to the Future. I had an early draft of the Zemeckis and Gale script, Back to the Future. It was mind-bogglingly great. Everybody passed on it. Everybody. Oh, it's so weird. He has an affair with his mother or whatever their reasons were. I have the rejection letters. So you have to be very careful about not taking that too seriously. I don't think that's changed. An original piece of material can sometimes scare people off.
Same
What's it
thing.
like, they'll say. And then if it's too much like something else, then it's not original and then they don't like it. You just have to stick to your guns.
That's a great point, and I think that's helpful for people who are out being creative in the world. Just because one person says no doesn't mean no means no. It just means no from that person, and you have to keep going. And it's all about taste. I mean, you talk a lot about taste, right? Your taste against somebody else's taste. It's a very, it's personal.
On the other hand, there's a line in the book that my husband wrote. If 10 people say you're drunk, lie down. So there comes the other part of the story, which is everybody hates your project. At what point do you say, you know what, maybe I should give it a rest for a while? My timing is off. The
Timing.
zeitgeist is wrong. And you put it on the shelf for a year or two. This is a long range thing. So you put it on the shelf for a while and then the tide turns. Everybody's interested in a horror movie all of a sudden. Everybody's interested in a romantic comedy all of a sudden. And you take it off the shelf and, but if everybody passes, it's discouraging, I mean, rejection is discouraging.
What do you think the trends are right now?
I wish I knew. I don't know. Big Marvel movies, nothing's, those big movies have dominated for so long. And will there come a time when everybody rebels? Probably, because that's what happens.
Were you surprised about the phenomenon, the Barbie phenomenon?
No, because both things were new and everybody was hungry for new. Also, people weren't going to the movies because of the pandemic. And all of a sudden, there are big, glossy movies made for a lot of money that are saying, come on in, you have to come see these movies, both in the same weekend. It's, the marketing was amazing. This is like nothing else. You can't even compare it to anything else.
No. But marketing is important, right?
Marketing is everything. It used to be we would go in with our little pitch and we wouldn't have an actor attached or a poster or a pitch deck or any of the things that everybody does now to sell the project. Marketing was not paramount, but now it is. Now you have to, kind of fuel your project with a lot of stuff. Nobody wants to read a naked script, which means no attachments. I mean, they will, but it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I have trouble getting people agents when it's just a script.
Right.
And some kid came off from my class, wrote a brilliant script. Doesn't happen that often. He says, "Can you help me get an agent?" And here's what happens. "Oh, it's good. What else has he got?" There's the "what else has he got" conversation. It's not enough to write a brilliant script. It's hard to get representation these days. I don't want to be too discouraging about that because it's gettable, but it's harder. That's all.
Sure. I mean, same, books, same. If a book gets a lot of attention and gets a lot of publicity, and that could help catch your eye, right? I mean, if it has some juice going, right?
Well, sure. If everybody's endorsed it and it starts to become recognized, that's what everybody wants. That's why IP, which is what it's called now,
Mhm.
attracts people because, oh, people like it. It must be something. So you're protected. Putting yourself on the line and saying, I recognize something and nobody else does, that's tricky. That's hard to do. I try to encourage my students to do that because I think it's so important and it's how I got ahead because I did that. But think about it. Are you the only guy? How many times have people said to me, "You're the only one who likes it"? That is my least favorite expression. You're the only one. And I say, okay, well, you know what? I may know something you don't know.
That's right. I may see something that you don't see. I mean, and that's important. And you have the right to say that because of everything you've done. So we could talk all day. I know we could. Carol, I'm so glad that you came, and yeah, we're at about 12:42 Eastern. So we had about almost 45 minutes, and it's been fascinating. Creative producing chapter number 3 is all about books. So those who are listening, you can take a look at chapter number 3 and the rest of it to really understand the business. Understand, if you have a book and you're interested in getting it in front of producers, how do you do it? Understand what producing is all about. I think, right? That's probably a good thing for everybody who wants to get their work in front of you and other people, because I know it's very difficult.
It's very difficult. And the reason I wrote this book is that I teach this every year and the questions are always the same. How do I do this? How do I write? How do I get somebody to pay attention to me? The questions never change. They really don't. So I put it in my language, using my projects as examples and my background as examples. But what's different about me, and I just want to say this because I think it's important. I'm a career person. That's what my mother used to say to me. You're a career person. What that means is I had jobs. Job, 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 job. And for each job, I met more and more people and I expanded my contacts, my writer contacts, my agent contacts. And if you live in California, just get an entry-level job. If you don't live in California, you can do it in New York. If you're in the middle of the country, that's harder. But
Sure.
getting a job is very, very important.
Get in the industry, know who's there, start making contacts, start making friends, and just get inside of it as opposed to be looking from the outside, right? Do you have
Exactly.
anything exciting coming up other than this fabulous book, Creative Producing? Is anything else coming up that
Well,
you're working
I
on?
have a number of projects that were put on hold during the strike. And one of my favorites is a series about Greta Garbo.
Ooh,
And it's very difficult to get people's attention on a person nobody knows anymore. But Greta Garbo was like a bisexual woman at a time where you weren't allowed to be that. And she had girlfriends. And so we're telling that story. And also, the second part of the story is that Greta Garbo, this famous, famous, gorgeous actress, helped people escape during Nazi Germany.
I've heard that.
And so we're telling we're amplifying it because we can't prove it, but there's enough there. These shows that we started talking about, they're inspired by the truth. They're not word for word Wikipedia, but they're inspired by the truth. So that's what we're doing. And I think it's a very exciting project. And we have a big actress attached. Who knows? We've been working on it for a couple of years now. And I hope that will happen because I'm excited about that project and many, many others. And I
Can you
have my
tell us the
Hallmark movies.
actress that's attached to that? Can you tell us the actress
I
that's attached?
can't because
Can't
it's
tell.
it's one of these unofficial attachments, no paper. They'll be mad at me if I say anything out loud.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to stay tuned. We'll
Stay
have to.
tuned.
Okay, Carol, it was such a pleasure having you. Creative Producing is the book. This is Book Trip TV. I'm Meryl Moss. Look for our other interviews that are coming. And Carol, let's stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.